In this video, I'll explain how to make clues in squares puzzles using Crossword Compiler. So this is an example of a clues in squares puzzle. It's like a puzzle with standard grid layout, but the clues are not separate, they're actually embedded in the grid. So there's a square here which has two clues in, and then there are arrows pointing to the words for the corresponding words for which the clue applies. So to make a puzzle like this, you can start in the new puzzle window by choosing the clues in squares box on the bottom left here, and choosing a size. Now, some standard grid patterns are provided. If you look in grid library sizes, that will show you which sizes are available. And you can select one of these, which will guarantee that some pre-existing grid patterns are there. Alternatively, you can just design the grid pattern as you like yourself at any standard size. So let's make something like this one here. So let's use that grid pattern. And I'll put the words in myself for the moment. So this gives me an empty grid, and then I can use standard Crossword Compiler features for filling the grid. So I can use autofill and so on. Cancel that for the moment. But this grid, which is pre-supplied, has clue squares set up. There's no clues in the clues, there's just clue as a placeholder. But it has the arrows pointing to the various different words out of each square, so it's ready for writing the clues once you've entered the words. If you want to make a new clue square, you can just double click. So if I double click here, that will make a new empty clue square. To edit the contents of the clue square and to change the arrows, you can use the clue editor, so this button on the toolbar, Edit Clue, and that will open the clue square editor. So here I can click to enter arrows. So if I want an arrow to the right, I can click there. If I want an arrow to the bottom, I can click there. Arrow to the left, I click there. I can use these buttons to move it up or down, and then I can have multiple if I want. So if I wanted one at the bottom and one at the top, I could set the arrows like that. Then I would enter the clue. So I could have first clue. And then if I wanted a second word, I could put a hyphen as on its own on a row, and that will put in a solid line across, and then I'd have second clue, and they can wrap. You can change here the number of lines per square, which affects the font size. So if I view that, you should see I now have these two arrows, and I have an up arrow and an upper arrow and a lower arrow. And of course, you can adjust the arrow by pushing these further up and further down so that they're better aligned with the actual clues if you want to. To delete it, you can just press delete. Another thing you can do is if you want to, instead of writing clues as text, you can insert pictures. So to do that, you could go to Edit, Insert Image File, or if you have one on the clipboard already, you could just paste it in. So let's select Image File, and I'll select a picture of a cat that I have. And then this allows you to change the width of the inserted picture in square units. So here, if I want it to be a single square, I just put 1, 1. So that'll just fill one square with my picture. And if I want to have an arrow, so this square can act as a clue, if I wanted, for example, to clue the word cat by the picture of a cat, I could then choose which direction of arrow I want here. So if I had a right arrow and then click OK, I'll then have a cat with my right arrow. So I go back to the clue square puzzle that's a bit more complete. If I wanted to edit this square, I would click on it, go to Edit Clue, and type in my clue. So here I'm missing a clue for bile and for time worn. So if I click this one to produce a word for bile, it shows me the answer word here. I've got bile. I've selected the example American database here, and here actually there are some clues for for the word bile. So if I want a digestive juice, I can just select that and click Use Clue. Along the bottom here, there's time worn. If I click that, well, the database doesn't actually have any clues for that, so I could type it in directly. So again, I'm going to separate it by putting a single hyphen on a line, and then I can put in my clues. So something like impaired by age. And click OK, and then I have my clue inserted. So you can see here I've got an example of a picture square with an ant pointing to an ant inserted, as I showed a few minutes ago. If you want to change the look of these various different arrows, there are lots of options that you can play with. So in Grid Properties, if you go to Advanced, there's a set here of clue squares options. So default clue square lines determines the default size of the font, so the number of lines that you can fit in each square. So you could increase that if you typically want to use longer clues. But of course, remember that if you include more lines, the fonts will get smaller and it'll become harder to read unless you print the puzzle at a reasonable size. If you select full-length clue dividers, you'll see that these not full-length dividers, and if I click Apply, change to full-length dividers so the line goes all the way across, the line separating the two clues. By default, my puzzle doesn't have the solution words in, but it has the clues and the squares, but the solution doesn't show the clue squares. But if you want to include the clue squares in the solution, then Grid Properties Advanced Show in Solution will also show them in the solution. Here you'll notice default block type is clue block, and that's because I started with a clue square puzzle. If I started with a different puzzle style, then the default here would be a normal block, and I could change this if I wanted to change it to clue block, so that double-clicking entered clue squares rather than black squares. The Arrow Style tab at the top here can be used to customize the appearance of the arrows. So here I've just got the default arrow style. So there's an option here to not show the clue square arrows except when editing. So that would show like this when I'm editing if I had that checked, but it wouldn't appear in the puzzle, and it would be up to the solver to work it out. If I select custom arrows, then there's a lot of different things here I can choose about the length of the arrows or the line width. I can make them a bit chunkier, and you can click Apply to preview the various different arrow styles that you can have. It's important for making interactive puzzles that every word has a corresponding clue square for it. And you can use this arrow, this check mark on the toolbar to check the grid to see whether actually every word has a clue. So here it says, OK, all words have clues. If I go back to my empty puzzle here and check it, you'll see that I get an error message. I get some clue squares are not linked to words. So that can be used to find places where you haven't yet written clues, which of course is rather a lot of places in this current grid. You can also insert larger pictures in the grid if you want to. So here's an example of a grid template which has a square in the middle for holding a larger picture. If this is not blocked out, if it was just you were starting designing a grid from scratch, they might look like this. And you can start with either you just want to go to the top left corner of where you want it. You can select the squares where you want it to appear, go to Edit, Insert Image File, and select the image. So I can go for this cat picture again, that may be a bit small for this purpose. And here it's selected the squares wide, squares high appropriately. And if you want to, as before, you can insert an arrow to act as a clue square, or you can not. Here, of course, because the image is going to be bigger, you can also select which square the arrow appears on. So here you can give the coordinates of the square and the arrow direction out of that square if you want to add a clue square arrow from the picture. So I select that, and now I have a large picture of a cat in the grid. So that's about it for clue square puzzles. These puzzles are particularly popular in Europe, so if you're actually doing these in a different language, you might also want to watch the video on using different languages for some tips on how to set things up for working easily in your language.